There's a lot of conversation about how the business model or the cost model of higher education is broken and needs to change. And while I generally agree with that, it's one of those topics that's not well defined. What does that really mean, and what aspects of the business model need to change? I think that there's probably three or four pieces of it that are most problematic. The first is what's happened to revenues and the need to diversify revenues and find new sources of revenues without changing the mission of the institution. Um, Higher colleges and universities have always been pretty good at seeking new sources of revenue, but not necessarily new sources of revenue that will pay for core functions and for the general. So that's harder to do. Finding revenues is very tricky in this environment. The other piece of the business model that's really going to be quite problematic in many institutions is that neither public nor nonprofit institutions have ever been in the business of making a profit. On the other hand, we have low-cost academic programs and high-cost academic programs, and part of our business model historically has been to pay for the costs of high-cost programs through cross-subsidies and moving revenues from low-cost programs. So the classic example of that is lower division English classes are a profit center in the sense that they're a relatively low-cost program, and institutions will take the funds from that and move them over to engineering or chemistry or fine arts, which cost more to operate than they are bringing in state funds or student tuitions. Well, with declining subsidies and students paying for the majority of revenues, the whole historic cross-subsidy is problematic on a couple of levels. The first is that we are charging lower division students, in many cases, more than we're spending on them, which, if that's, it can be problematic if we allow it to continue, and particularly in an environment where we have sharp questioning of value and costs. So we need to be careful about that one. The other issue is that the things that have always been our low-cost programs are those facets of teaching that are most susceptible to a distance-based education or technology substitutes. There are lots of low-cost options now for students to pursue. They don't have to go to a university. So we're going to see the competition for the low-cost programs is greater than it ever has been before, and the revenue sources and the willingness of students to subsidize things that are not directly benefiting them is problematic. Third piece of the business model that is problematic I've alluded to, and that has to do with the public and policy reaction to rising costs. The public thinks that college and university tuitions are going up because the institutions are spending money on things that are not necessary, and that they're doing it to kind of feather their own nests or advance the institution rather than to do what they need to do. They're not entirely right about that. Most of the reason that tuitions are going up is because of budget cuts in the state area and public institutions. Prices are going up, actual costs, spending is going down. But you have to be pretty inside baseball to actually know that math. And so the public and policymakers are quite reasonably frustrated because of the huge spikes in college tuition, and they're increasingly asking questions about value and whether college is worth it, whether the institutions are well managed, whether costs could be controlled without compromising quality. And so the level of questioning and impatience about college finance is greater than I've ever seen it. And that critique of finance has become a flashpoint for a larger public critique about higher education, extending to the value of shared governance and the value of faculty control of academic policy, which we've always respected in the academy, and to the credibility of the governing boards and whether the people on those boards are doing the job that needs to be done to properly oversee the cost function. Board members need to be leading the conversation about restructuring of costs, and creating an environment where that is a part of the way that business is done. It's not something that is antithetical to quality. Uh, they need to support the president in what is a huge cultural change in many institutions. They need to bring their knowledge of cost analysis and strategic finance to the table to help lead these institutions in the direction they need to go. They need to be patient, but not too patient. I think that a lot of board members want to get into this conversation, and they want to get into it faster than the president does or the faculty want to. And a board that is too aggressive in this will create tensions that are hard for everybody to live with. By the same token, no board should be letting this conversation drift. It's essential to institutional survival and institutional effectiveness. So the board's got to own this one.